When I undertake research, which always has the desired outcome of ending up in a book, and usually I have the frame first, what I think that I'm looking for. Like with the Female Advantage, I was looking for what real contributions women can make as leaders, what that looks like, what it looks like when you have an organization that's led by a woman who's comfortable with the fact that she's a woman and feels that that's part of what she has to offer. With the Web of Inclusion, I wanted to look at how does a web function in different kinds of settings? What are the issues and challenges it's particularly adept at dealing with, and what are the characteristics of a web-like organization, and what kind of leadership does it require? When I did Everyday Revolutionaries, I was very interested in the question of how have communities and the workplace changed in the typical sort of suburban environment that would be comparable to and different than what William White found when he did The Organization Man in the 50s. He was looking at very traditional industrial organizations in bedroom communities in the suburbs that were basically entirely men. What now? And he was looking at what that meant for the community, and as well as the individuals. I wanted to do something similar and say, what does that look like now that women are working? How are our typical American suburban community, how is that different than what White found? So I usually have a question that I'm trying to find the answer to. I want to do it in a very descriptive way. It's so intuitive and capricious in a way. Like with Intel, I think the Intel study in the Web of Inclusion was a really good one. And why did that happen? I got a letter from a guy at Intel. He'd been a lawyer after the Female Advantage came out. And he loved the Female Advantage. He felt that it represented a lot of his own leadership style. And he wanted to tell me about this very interesting thing that was happening at Intel. He said, we've been able to make a real impact on the organization, even though we're sort of a fringe unit. And I had a conversation with him. And 2 years later or so, when I was thinking about the Web of Inclusion, I thought, well, that could be an interesting study. Sometimes you go out and it doesn't really pan out. So I went out there and spent a couple weeks hanging around Intel and interviewing people and trying to see what I could put together and see the extent to which it could answer that question. So it's more, it is very descriptive, and I'm trying to describe what I see in a way that will answer a question that interests me and that I think other people are interested in. So in that way, it kind of goes back to the Dan Wolfe philosophy that I presume, as Dan Wolfe, the head of the Village Voice, presumed about his writers, and he wasn't a writer himself at all, but I presume that something that interests me enough will find an audience, and so I pursue it. And it's not an academic, particularly academic approach. And I do get, it's interesting, I think that I get an inquiry probably every 3 days from a graduate student somewhere. What's your methodology? And how do I describe it? And I don't really have a description for it. It's journalistic, and I think in an academic frame you could call it heuristic inquiry. I've heard that term used to describe what I do. It's a path that I feel grateful that I can pursue, because I think it's a kind of research that would be somewhat difficult to justify in an academic environment, even though I often feel that if I were in an academic environment, there would be many advantages to that, and it would be very enjoyable in other ways. But I don't think I'd be able to do the research I do in the way that in the very journalistic and to some degree, impressionistic way that I do.